Spectator's political correspondent. So, first question, does this mark the end of Boris Johnson's frontline political career?
Well, Esther, I remember when similar things were said after he resigned over Chequers a few years ago. And of course, a year or so later, he was back in number 10, centre of the action. You can never write off Boris Johnson, but I think that he has emerged from the Privileges Committee as a slightly diminished figure, and he's now got a battle on his hands.
Well, do you think that what happened at the committee will have changed anybody's opinion about Boris Johnson? Or because what it seemed to me from the reactions I saw is that all the people who supported Boris Johnson said he was absolutely, he did really well and all the rest of it. And people who didn't like Boris Johnson said it was an absolute disaster. I mean, do you actually think it changed anybody's perspective about Boris Johnson?
I would say probably not many people, because obviously this has been going on for the best part of about 18 months now. We've also seen so much briefing on both sides. All of Boris Johnson's arguments have been tested out in the press by allies saying this and that, pointing to the committee's biases, etc. But I think it really depends on what the 7 MPs are going to come up with. And I think you could tell from some of their questioning some of the likely outcomes of this. I think you saw Harriet Harman making the comparison with the speedometer, saying if you're going 100 miles per hour, do you really need someone else to tell you that's breaking the law? I think also what was interesting was Charles Walker at the end raised a really interesting question, which is that maybe he recklessly missed the House, but not deliberately, which, of course, where does that leave us in the territory of this? And I think that although you look at public opinion, I saw a poll today which said that 2/3 of the public think that Boris Johnson has misled the House. It's whether you can do so deliberately, and ultimately, can you really assess what he told the committee about, which was in his heart? So I will be very interested to see the report when it comes out. But as you say, Philip, I think that at this stage, not many minds are really being shifted, because we all have an opinion of Boris Johnson one way or the other.
People watching him said that he seemed like a different character, though. He wasn't ruffling his hair, he wasn't playing the Joker, taking it really seriously. In the papers today, they say Johnson's on a charm offensive, getting ready should there be a by-election in his seat.
Yes, well, we reported last week that he was readopted for a seat of Uxbridge and South Ruislip, and there was a lot of obviously speculation that he might do the so-called chicken run and go to a constituency which a much safer majority. I think that's ultimately because when you're Prime Minister, obviously it's very difficult to get out and about the constituency. He's obviously been going around the world making these speeches, so he's trying to sort of prepare for the local ground troops, etc. On current polling trends, I saw Lord Hayward say today that he would almost certainly lose that seat, because I think the Labour are predicted to win with a majority of somewhere sort of margin of 15%. It's obviously a difficult time for him, but I do wonder perhaps if on the committee, obviously there's 4 Conservatives out of 7, I do wonder if any Conservatives, whatever you think of Boris, really want a by-election at this stage, given how the polls are constantly showing a 15-point Labour lead.
Some of his supporters are saying actually he wanted to go to a safer seat. There could be a positive outcome to losing the seat, that he can go actually to a safer one.
There's an interesting argument, actually, and I think, I'm going to a political conference this weekend. I can't be fascinated to take the temperature of the political grassroots. We've got the National Conservative Convention today as well in the West Midlands, and there are certainly associations across the country, Esther, which would, I think, happily endorse Boris Johnson as their candidate. I think that although his public ratings are pretty low right now, about -50, in the party he does still have those pockets of support, and he'll always be remembered as the man who got Brexit done. Ultimately, I think that he would like to come stay on and maybe, not go down in the Privileges Committee. But, if he does do that, then I think that there'll be plenty of places that'll want to have him back.
James, one of the other big issue of the week was the Northern Ireland Windsor Framework vote in Parliament. What's your analysis of that? Was that a good week for Rishi Sunak? Was the fact that 22 Tory MPs voted against it, was that good for him? Was that lower than people had anticipated? Or when people added on the abstentions and said, well, 70 Tory MPs didn't vote for it, is that something that he should be worried about? Will he be pleased or worried by the events of this last week?
I think he can be pleased from the events of this last week. I think someone in number 10 has been reading Sun Tzu and only attacking when you're from a position of strength, because they held this vote, they scheduled it for the same afternoon that there was the Privileges Committee investigation into Boris Johnson. That sort of distracted, I think, Rishi Sunak's enemies a little bit in terms of firing which way. Ultimately, as you say, only 20 Tory MPs voted against this, and there's been a bit of spinning around this, saying there were abstentions. Well, I don't really see how people like Grant Shapps, who didn't vote, member of the cabinet, obviously, people like Simon Hoare, who didn't vote, or Maria Miller, can really be said to be members of the European Research Group. I think ultimately the problem was that the ERG had too many captains and not enough privates in it. There were some great big name figures who came out against the deal. Boris Johnson himself, Liz Truss, Ian Duncan-Smith, 3 former Tory leaders, but they just don't command the forces anymore. And the kindest thing you can say about that is that they're a victim of their own success. They got Brexit done, most of it in 2019. I think the show has now moved on.
And just finally, James, Keir Starmer obviously did his big speech about crime this week. Was that a sign of his growing confidence that he was sort of in effect moving on to what is historically seen as a Conservative territory, or was it a bit of an own goal because it was exposed that he'd stopped all those Jamaicans being repatriated who went on to commit some more crimes? Was it a good week or a bad week for Keir Starmer?
I think Keir Starmer and Labour have had a few bad weeks, actually. And I think that you saw that in their response to the budget, and you saw this in the crime speech yesterday. I thought it was most telling, actually, that even the BBC News cut away from him after just 3 minutes. And it's because there was not much new or interesting, really, that he was saying. And I think it's been overshadowed by the events of the Windsor framework and obviously what happened with Boris Johnson as well. This is obviously Labour's attempt to kind of take some kind of stance on security issues. One of Rishi Sunak's 5 messages is about stopping the small boats. Labour can't really talk about that, so they're instead trying to pivot to talking about crime and cuts in public services and the justice system. So it's an attempt to move away from a kind of Tory-friendly area into a much more Labour-focused friendly area, which is about public spending, which obviously they're very much in favour of. So I think it was an attempt, but I don't think it really had the cut-through that Keir Starmer and the people around him would have been hoping for.